Hi everyone, can you hear me okay?
Hello.
Hi Inga, hi Tim, hi Kieran, hi Rachel, hi Julia, hi Sarah.
Hi.
Nice to have you, and I hope we're going to have a good little discussion here about millennials and how they're approaching faith and how they're thinking about faith. We don't have any millennials in the room, I don't think, do we? Judging by all of us. Well, let's start off by thinking who millennials are. So
I'm not sure if I count. I don't know.
Kieran, how old are you?
I'm 32.
32. Oh, you are a millennial. There you go. You can put us right on everything.
Yeah,
okay?
well, yeah. I'm gonna turn my video off because I'm eating curry, and I don't really want that recorded.
That's no problem. That's no problem. Yeah, millennials born between 1985 and 2000. That's kind of the general definition that's given. So basically, they're now between 21 and 35. And the millennial definition is basically because we're talking about anyone born before the turn of the century. So I'm going to share my screen, hopefully, with you, and we're going to have a little chat about how we can share faith with millennials and how we can make our church culture millennial friendly and where are millennials coming from. So maybe have a think about what used to work in your church but isn't working as well now amongst millennials next generation. Have a think about that. What used to work but maybe isn't working quite as well amongst the next generation? What do you see happening? What are your thoughts? What do you observe? Anyone got any thoughts on that? Anything you think that young adults are struggling with in terms of church, in terms of connecting with faith?
I'll pipe up.
Go on, Kieran.
I'll put my video on as well because I won't be eating curry whilst talking to you. So I think one of the things, it's not actually necessarily been my experience, but one of the things that my wife, Amy, who's about a year younger than me, talks about quite a lot is like the lack of opportunity to actually engage actively in a service. Like if you just take, like, for example, I'm from the Anglican tradition, I'm a curate at All Hallows Church, and taking a bog standard service, there's space maybe before or after the service to talk or to engage actively and own some of the stuff that's happening. But other than that, it can be difficult to escape a feeling of passivity.
Yeah.
Sometimes, not all the time, but I think sometimes that. Yeah. And actually, I mean, like if you think about the way the Church of England services were designed, that's exactly what the point was. You know, the idea was that the people would learn, and they would learn well, and they learned the right stuff, and and that was that. But yeah.
Great. So that's really good insight. We'll think a bit more about that in a bit. And anyone else observe anything about the next generation and maybe things that aren't working for them?
In formality.
In formality isn't
formality.
Yeah.
I think heavy formality doesn't work for a lot of people.
Okay. Yeah. Really helpful.
And the home group brings an intimacy that people can use. And I think that's been very true. It's not one thing that one's given up on me. No.
Yeah. Great. Anyone else want to contribute at this stage?
Is it all right if I just chip in on Christopher, what Christopher was saying? Because I think he's right, but I would also want to draw a distinction between heavy formality and the presence of reverence or ritual, because I think there are ways of doing reverence and ritual that can be very, very life-giving and fruitful for people who have no formalized rituals, or very few formalized or inherited rituals outside maybe their family. So yeah, I think that's just worth saying. But I think
I agree with that. Thank you. I agree with that.
Great. So let's have a think about some research that we did. So I was fascinated by the fact that lots of churches were asking, will what got us here get us there? This is a snowboarding vicar from Kent who basically performs services on his local ski slope, which is interesting. Artificial ski slope, by the way, but really interesting. And churches asking, well, will what worked before work now? And actually, from my experience, there seems to be a kind of a tectonic plate clash, particularly in the workplace, of cultures and of understanding and of worldview. So how do we understand the next generation? How do we understand millennials? So we went out and did a big body of research 2 years ago now to really understand what was making millennials tick, what were they questioning about, what were they concerned about, what was shaping their worldview. And I was challenged by the fact that a lot of the literature was stereotyping millennials as self-centered, narcissistic, lazy slackers, wanting instant gratification, disloyal, pampered, spoiled, lack of respect, having a lack of respect for authority and entitled. And I didn't believe that literature. I didn't believe what I was reading in the literature about millennials. And for me, this was an issue because actually when I was 35, I became chief exec of a major national charity. And I was questioning, how have the 35-year-olds have now been shaped? How have they been formed? How are they approaching faith? How are they approaching leadership? What's their culture like? And therefore, how do we engage with them and engage with them well? And I was really struck by a lot of new phenomena that were happening. You know, basically a lot of what we see happening in the commercial world is that millennials going more to access rather than ownership. They are the renting generation. They are the Uber generation. They are those who want access to everything, but not necessarily to own things. So what's going on? What's changed? What's changed in the way that they're thinking about life? I was also challenged by the British Social Attitudes Survey in 2018, where 7 out of 10 young adults say they have no religion, and only 2% of young adults identify as C of E. So we have an issue, we have a problem, we have a situation. So how do we understand that? So we went out and did research with nearly 500 Christian millennial leaders working in business, public sector, charities, churches, broad demographic and national picture, and produced this research report 2 years ago on millennials and their culture. So we did 50 in-depth qualitative interviews. So we heard 50 stories and 442 online questionnaires. And I'll take you on a whistle-stop tour through the results of that, and we'll have think about some of the implications for your church culture, and hopefully get a good discussion going as well. So after each one, I'll talk about the implications, and then maybe we can ask questions and converse on it as well. So the first finding from the research was that culture beats programs every time. So it's not what you are doing, but the way that you're doing it was one of the major things that millennials told us. So when you ask millennials what are the top qualities in the most effective leaders, they will talk about integrity, humility, and passion. There is a sense that they want authenticity, they want realness. And Christopher, you alluded to this in terms of the intimacy and authenticity of being real, and Kieran, you pointed out that actually, you know, some some formality can be really real for people, but there's a sense in which millennials want things to be real. They want our actions to match up to our words. They want to see the reality of who we are. They want to come close to us. They want to live life with us. So a huge focus for millennials on authenticity, reality, having difficult conversations, being clear about who we are, and exposing our life to people and living life with people and coming close to people. So some of the implications of this are that trust with millennials is earned through consistency and empathy. It's not given because of a positional competency. So millennials would tell us that their default position when joining a business is not to trust the leadership. Trust is earned. It's earned over time. They've seen far too many business failures, far too many leadership failures for trust to be a given. Millennials expect to come close and to see things in the raw. They want to experience that you are the real deal. They expect humility and a realistic appraisal of current reality, faults and failures. But they respond really well to authentic passion and purpose. But hierarchical, top-down, dictatorial, ego-driven, mask-wearing cultures are detested, and behaviors are more important than words. So really fascinating insights. So some practical questions for us are we as the church opening up our lives and our relationships and becoming more real? Are challenging issues being exposed and tackled, which requires courage and humility? And how good are you at doing real life together? And how good are you at challenging poor behavior in your church? So let's have a little discussion about that. What do you think? What do you think of that and its implications? This idea that integrity and reality and authenticity are really important for millennials, and therefore the implications that has on us in terms of sharing faith and being church. Your thoughts?
Well, I think the quality of presentation in church needs to fulfill those criteria. Therefore, taking up Kieran's point about reverence, I think that even in informal worship, there can be reverence, but clear presenting and clear arguments. And I would think that that's very important, and that we're real about the rest of life. And we're, for example, the militant atheists, we have to be real about their genuine opposition, which is taken serious.
Yeah, thank you. Inga, you raised your hand?
Yes, I did. And it's complete coincidence that Tim, my husband, and me are in the same group. We never knew what each other. So our two boys are just too old, just on the other side of the millennium. But I think I'd love to get the report and actually let them read it and see what they feel, whether it's something they think go with them. But I think one of the things young people will look at, and that is that trust is earned, as this report said. I think that's really important because young people are probably brought up more to Christian things. When we were young, we were maybe more prone to take things and this was what the leader said and so on. But younger people, you know, the world has changed with internet and social media and so on. So they are more into questioning things. And I think that is where we are church leaders and all of us in church have a responsibility that we need to think about that. And, you know, it is about, you know, sometimes we've had the discussion with our boys, you know, to say, you know, if they see something in church that hasn't gone as they would have liked to have seen it, to say, but actually there's a difference to what we as people do and then to God, because God is the one who leads us as Christians, and church leaders may sometimes fail and do things which we feel is not the right thing to do. So that's where I think it is about the trust we need to earn.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Inga. Tim, you raised your hand as well.
Yes, I think one of the things up here is about authority and integrity. And I think you were arguing that millennials respond quite negatively to authority and therefore being told how to be a Christian by people that they don't identify Christian value in when they actually look at the way that person is telling them. I spent 3 years at university as an agnostic because I had been told that as a non-born again Christian, I couldn't possibly be a Christian in my Christian union. And I came back to Christianity through my experience as a developing doctor and a realization that there was more to life than science. And that's been a journey back for a very, very long period of time. But I still regret, I went into Jesus College Chapel as an alumni meeting. I always regret that actually I spent 3 years at college with this wonderful building, which I didn't connect with at all because I had been persuaded that I couldn't possibly be a Christian because I wasn't that sort of a Christian.
Yeah. Brilliant. So that's really helpful and really helpful conversation. And I think the thing for me is that actually this requires us to be braver about sharing our doubts. This requires us to be braver about talking about our challenges. This requires us to be braver about being real about the experience of Christ in our lives, and to be real about some of the challenges of living that out, because young people will be attracted by the authenticity of the wrestle and the struggle and the journey. And so it's a call to a deeper level of authenticity about our faith, both the good things and the challenges and the struggles as well. Great. So let's Kieran, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I was just one of the things that I think can earn you trust very quickly is if you have someone from this generation in your church is opening the circle of influence to include them.
Yeah.
Totally.
That's
a huge deal. And obviously there are safe and unsafe ways to do that, but that's and it will always be a risk. But I think that's like, it's actually, I would say, a really quick win. Even though it's quite risky, it is a very quick way to earn a significant amount of trust.
Totally. And we'll come on to a bit more of that in a little while. So when we asked leaders what were the things that would most likely to negatively impact their leadership as millennials, the top one was fear of failure, a need for approval, and lack of confidence. So what we found in the millennial generation was actually a lower level of resilience, a fragility of identity and confidence and self-esteem. Interestingly in that, what millennials were saying is we need environments in which we can try, innovate, fail safely and learn. We highly desire situations where we can come in and we can experiment and we can innovate, but environments that we know that are safe to do that. And one of the things that millennials told us is we don't think anybody knows how to reach our generation. So we long for a church culture where we can try new things and fail and learn and pick ourselves back up, where they are safe and supportive cultures, where we can be creative, where we can experiment, where we can innovate, and where we can flourish, because really nobody knows what's going to fully work. So be prepared to try and fail. This idea that actually we need to create cultures that are high support and high challenge, I call them liberating cultures, or cultures that are have tight ropes and safety nets, I think Pete Winter calls them, ones that are high in support but also high in challenge as well. So some practical questions would be, how is your church measuring success, and is there room for failure in your church culture? Identity is fragile. How is your church helping millennials deal with issues of insecurity and identity? Are the environments we're creating in our churches one of high support and high challenge? And when we send people into messy situations, do we have the necessary support mechanisms in place? So any reflections on that? Any thoughts?
One of the spaces that I immediately go to is thinking about how to engage with this kind of level of generation alongside a generation that has a very clear sense of identity currently in the church, often attached to the church. It's not always a negative thing actually at all, but there's that the generational relationships there present a challenge. By no means insurmountable, because, like, you know, even if we think it's impossible, God can do anything he wants, right? But I think that's the first place my mind really goes to. If I want to help, if we end up with a load of millennials in our congregation, how do I lead both generations effectively at the same time? At least in one space. It's not that you only have one space for leading, because I think sometimes you'll end up having to have different spaces for different kinds of, but I think it's important to have a gathering where everyone is together. It's
interesting, Kieran, in the business world, which I spend most of my time in, that mentoring now is actually becoming bi-directional mentoring. It's actually a two-way conversation. So gone are the days where a boss would say, well, I'm going to mentor a more junior person, and it's a one-way street. It's actually a two-way street, and that's partly because technology has moved so quickly, the worldview is so different, that actually leaders are recognizing that they need to listen as much as they give. And there's a two-way street of learning there. So creating a culture in which there's a sharing and a learning across the generations is really powerful. Christopher, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to comment that part of my experience was we had a consultancy arrangement for clergy in the Bristol diocese. This is before management of clergy came in, and I found myself working with a very able ordained social worker, and we used to meet and give each other time, and it was very reinforcing. Yeah,
no, totally, absolutely. And we'll come on to the mentoring in a minute. So one other finding from the research was 94% of millennials said that the quality of their relationships in an organization were important or extremely important. In fact, when you ask a millennial what's the most important thing about the place that you work or the organizations that you're part of, they will always say relationships first. That's the first thing that trips off their tongue, is actually it's the relationships that's important, and a large emphasis on teamwork and collaboration. So less so on the individual, more so on teamwork and on collaboration. So in the workplace, they would see achievement as a team being more worthy of accolade than achievement as an individual. And a lot of businesses now actually moving towards celebrating team much more than celebrating individual. So really interesting. The implications there that leadership is increasingly seen as a team game. The emphasis in any initiative needs to be on the journey and the people, less than on the outcomes and the activities. So that's really interesting, I think, as you're thinking about, well, what do we do to attract millennials? Well, actually, they're going to be much more interested in the journey and the people than in necessarily the activity and the outcomes that you're seeking. And also, finally, one of the implications here is unity and working together are a hygiene factor. Why aren't we working together rather than why should we work together? And collaboration is key. So let me give you a little insight to that. And for boomers like myself, so I'm 56, my worldview started off as very, very narrow. Very narrow in that I had BBC One and BBC Two. In my teenage years, ITV came on and I wasn't allowed to watch it because Tiswas was on it and it was evil. In my 20s, Channel 4 came on and then Channel 5. My local rag was the South Wales Echo. There was no internet. I grew up with Gren cartoons and the particular nuances of Welsh culture in the South Wales Echo. And if I wanted to know anything that my parents wouldn't tell me, it was my aunties and uncles and cousins that I turned to. The reality for millennials is they've grown up with a worldview that is broad. So mine was narrow and has broadened out over life. They've started with a hugely broad agenda and worldview, and therefore they see the big issues. They see climate change, they see racial injustice, they see the big world issues, and actually they also acknowledge that those can only be solved by people coming together and bringing unity, and therefore they won't believe you if you say your church is going to solve the world's problems or your business is going to. And therefore they're saying, how are we working together? And really important therefore that we think cross deanery, cross diocese. How are we working together? How are we emphasizing the things that are important to us as a whole more than the things that are important to us as an individual as well? So any thoughts or comments on it being a team game, relationships being important? Any reflections on that? Oh, who have we got here? So Tim, you've raised your hand and then I'll come to you, Kieran.
Yes, as a non-millennial, I'm rather regretting that I'm not a millennial because what you've described sounds wonderful to me. I think one of the problems is diversity and identity, I think, is really something we're all wrestling with. Yeah. And I've often felt that one of the problems we have with identity is that we're not all together very sure who we are, but we know who we're not. And that we often define identity and exclude people on that basis. And I think I'm hearing that millennials really struggle with that exclusion because they embrace diversity in a way that we can maybe struggle with.
Yeah, and interestingly, I would say they've gone beyond inclusion and diversity, and what they're asking for is co-creation. So there's a Ghanaian proverb which says, it's good to invite me to your table, but it's better to invite me into your kitchen. Which basically says, we've treated the inclusion agenda as, let's make space around our table for people of different nationalities, races, genders, but it's on our terms with our agenda and our outlook, and we're serving our food and we wash up. Whereas millennials are saying, actually, we want to come in the kitchen and create something brand new with you, and we want to bring our spices and our recipes, and we want to see what the fusion of those is that will create something different and new. And I think that has huge implications for us as well. Kieran, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to what you were saying about the breadth of the worldview. I think what comes along with the widening of that is that worldview is a kind of overwhelming anxiety, and I think one of the things that I have observed about like the cultural sphere that I've grown up in is that, well, we're really desperate to save the world, but we're not really sure we can do it.
Yeah.
And I think part of me thinks that that's actually inherited from boomers. It's just kind of taken on a very different form for the next generation. Yeah. Because we're far more aware of how intractable the stuff is, that they want to fix. And I really think that there's a lot of space for the gospel to speak into that space of fear and anxiety, and almost being like, yeah, like because I think that there's kind of there's a real desperation to kind of say, well, if we work hard enough or find this solution or that solution or all of the solutions at once, then we can save the world. But actually we can't. We just can't. Like, it's not.
I think that's so true. Absolutely true. There's a fragility as well there, and an understanding of less resilience. But partly it is because of the global worldview that we never had. Yeah. But having that global worldview, it then becomes a case of what's my identity and where do I fit and who's my tribe and all those kind of questions as well. I'm going to keep whistling through if that's okay.
Can I just...
Sorry, Christopher.
I don't know how to put my hand up electronically. I just wanted to say that it seemed to me that the Eucharist was rather, as you suggested, not quite in the kitchen, but invited to share in it. And one of the difficulties is it's got so formal that people can't see the wood for the trees.
Yeah. Really helpful. Purpose is really important for millennials. They're always asking the why question, and indeed shared purpose. So how do we co-create a shared purpose? How do we create a shared purpose in our church? Which, Kieran, was to your point of how do we involve millennials in the journey and bring them into the leadership team and help them shape the future. I just want to talk about this idea of personal brand, which came out really strongly in the research, which is that actually millennials, by the time they're in their 20s, have actually established a personal brand on Instagram where they're actually speaking out on issues. So they're speaking out on issues like climate change, racial injustice, etc. And they've almost defined themselves by their look and their feel on social media. And therefore they come to our churches and will have real difficulty joining in with our churches if we're not speaking out on those issues. And businesses find this really hard, actually, which is, you know, they will say, well, we won't speak out about climate because it's nothing to do with us. And yet a millennial will say, well, it's everything to do with me. And I'm talking to my friends about this on social media. And therefore, if I'm going to come and join you, I need to know that you're speaking out on it as well. So they will think through how their own sense of purpose aligns with the purpose of your church. They will want to be involved in developing a shared sense of purpose. Your definition of that purpose matters, and they will want to explore values on ethos and how it aligns with their personal values in ethos as well. Mentoring and one-on-one leadership developments are the most desired. We talked about that earlier, but really it's, you know, if you can have a mentoring scheme in your church for younger people and millennials, they're used to that. That's how they like to be trained. Interestingly, I would say it's a discipling generation. If you ask millennial leaders what's the best thing about their job, they will say raising up the next generation. I was not saying that when I was a 27-year-old leader. It wasn't even part of my language. They want to be in that relationships where they're teaching and learning, and they desire your focused time and attention, and they're wanting to be asked into an intentional discipleship relationship. So my final bit as we come to the end of this in the last 6 minutes is Are millennials leading the Jesus way? What do you see in the research that encourages you that millennials are leading the Jesus way? And what do you see in the research that identifies work that needs to be done to redeem the leadership approach of millennials? So what encourages you? And what challenges you, do you think? Inga, you've got your hand raised.
Yes, just before you came to this slide, I was just thinking, how do we do it? And I was just thinking, the only way we can do is we point to Jesus. You know, and then it came up about the Jesus way, because I think if we can try and link to how Jesus cared for the world and his people, and then point to what we need to do today for each other and for God's world and the world we share. So I think that's where young people might be able to identify. If we take climate change and the support of less well-off people so more seriously, you know, I think there are younger people who will resonate with that. So that's maybe a challenge for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tim, you had your hand up as well.
Yes, I said I wished I was a millennial. You've actually convinced me I am a millennial. I've just come out of 40 years in the NHS as a doctor, and the real pleasure was to take what I had been taught and raise the next generation as we go along. And actually, the NHS is struggling with that now. But I think actually one of the most useful things you've done for me, Simon, is to say, I don't need to be worried about this stuff because I can connect with millennials, because there's a lot of it in me already.
Absolutely, and that's really encouraging as well. And then Kieran, you've got your hand up as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is really interesting about the research that you've kind of offered is that there is a dual desire to be very safe and protected, and also a real struggle with conflict and confrontation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so actually, I think one of the spaces where millennials could really benefit from kind of the no-nonsense approach that you can find in people who are 20 years older is like where like you need to set boundaries. you need to set boundaries. You need to be able to say not just like call out something and say that it's bad, but you need to be able to say, this is a behavioral boundary that you don't cross here. Which is slightly different to social media lobbying. Like I think it inhabits a very different space actually. So actually, one of the things that would be incredibly encouraging is being able to be known to be a safe place. And like that can be to do with safeguarding, but it doesn't, I mean, like obviously everyone needs to be like strong on safeguarding, but I think to be demonstrably able to draw those boundaries and say gently but firmly, this kind of behavior is not okay. This is how we do things in this community, and that's for all of our good. Being able to do that can be really effective, even if it's painful for a millennial to encounter. I think that's another thing.
Brilliant. So these are the things that I saw in the research, that millennials are passionate about mentoring and discipleship. So what are we doing to help them on that discipleship journey and helping them disciple others? They're passionate about relationship and community. So what are we doing to develop community? They're passionate about purpose and why. So what are we doing to help them develop a shared sense of purpose? The whole of life matters to them, soul, body, and spirit. So how are we working with them in a wholehearted way that is holistic for them on soul, body, and spirit? They're wholehearted and they're really curious. They ask really good questions. And to me, there's so much of the Jesus way in that, so much to be celebrated. And actually, I believe that they can help us find a deeper sense of the Jesus way if we'll embrace them and their questions and their struggles and their challenges as well. Here's some supplementary slides on that we asked, and we didn't publish in the research really, which is we asked the Christian millennials what their non-Christian peers are asking about. And this was really interesting. So where can I find real happiness was the top question. The third question, can there be real justice? And the fourth question, where do I belong? And also, how can I reconcile science and religion? So some real keys there as to the kinds of questions that millennials are asking. Where can I find real happiness? How can I reconcile science and religion? Can there be real justice? And where do I belong? But interestingly, the other ones are, who can I trust as well? So that was fascinating to us. I hope that's been really helpful for you. I hope it's given you food for thought. You can find the full research. You can download it on millennial-leader.com, and there are some key recommendations for churches in there as well, which Kieran has just highlighted, which will give you some ideas about how you might move forward. And these slides will be available, and the recording of this session will be available for you as well. Hope you find that helpful. Any final questions, comments, thoughts? Great. Enjoy the rest of the day, and we will see you later. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the conversation.